Let's take a look at how to utilize the point position pass within Nuke. I'm going to go to File, Open, go into our project group, Nuke, and then I'm going to open up Chapter 8, Point Position Pass Start. So I'm going to jump into our project settings. I'm going to set our project root for our project directory. So let's take a look at this first example. First off, I'm going to just make sure I'm setting my knob defaults. I'm going to drop in a shuffle node and then shuffle out our point position pass and world space. And what we can do with this node is actually utilize it to do a radial selection of parts of our world. And I have a gizmo or a preset set up for us. If we go to File, Insert Comp Nodes, Presets, and then Point Position Selection. And right away we start to get this, which is just the radial selection of parts of the world. And if I double click on a point selection, you notice we have two different controls, location and amount. The amount is going to control the amount of radial selection. And then the location is the position of which we want to select. So if we disable this and go to the color picker and select parts of our world by just hitting that color picker and just doing Control left click and drag, and I can re-enable it just like that. If I want to come over here, select that area or this area, it's really, really easy. This can be really, really useful for doing a lot of things. In this case, I'm going to utilize it to create a pool of light within our scene. So if I hit M to merge, and then I'm going to set this merge to a multiply, and then just tone back that amount just like that. You can see we're kind of creating this pool of light here. And if we come back up here, disable our point position selection, we can do all sorts of stuff like make a pool light back there, just like that. Now that's our hotspot. And come back in here and move that back. There's maybe something over here. And the more we increase this mix amount, the hotter the pool is. Again, you can use this for all sorts of things like color grading, vignetting, creating pools of light. If you want to dive in here and figure out how this works, feel free to dissect it. You can just select the point position node and hit Control Enter. And you can just see I'm just using this expression node and I'm linking it up to the gizmo. Feel free to dissect all that. I'm going to jump over to this next example, which is point position pass noise. So what this technique actually does is adds a procedural noise over all of our scene. So let's just drop in another shuffle node. I'm going to shuffle out that point position world pass again. So point position world. And then I'm going to File, Insert Comp Nodes, go to point position noise in our presets. So presets, point position noise. And that'll add in a little gizmo that creates this procedural noise pattern. We have some values that we can play with here. If you're wondering what these all mean, they're actually coming from the original noise gizmo. So we got things like octaves, link rarity, gain, all that stuff. All that stuff is pulled straight from the noise gizmo itself. So we have size here, which controls the size of the procedural noise. If we left click here in between our 1 and our 0 on our octaves, we can middle mouse scroll up and down to control this. And you can see it's kind of adding this detail to our image right there along these edges. Link rarity, you can see what it does. It's kind of adding this like high frequency noise to our edges. So the smaller we go, the more lumpy it is. And then if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see it just gets more and more high frequency in that noise. And then gain just controls the amount of that high frequency noise like that. So say we wanted to utilize this point position noise technique to add some rust in our scene, something like that. If I hit G to drop in a grain node and then utilize this as a mask, and you'll notice if we go to the point position noise, we currently don't have an alpha. So it's currently just, the noise is just in the RGB. So if I do another shuffle and shuffle red into the alpha like that, we can start doing some stuff like this, which is adding that noise into our scene. And if we come in here and do something like grab this color wheel and then just add in a tinted orange color, maybe for rust, we can do that. So two things. One, the rust isn't really showing up really well. And two, we want to add it just collecting right here on the edges here, just where we're making contact on the floor. So how do we do that? If we drop in another gray node by hitting G after our point position noise, we can play with the gamma of that noise pattern so we can get it to show up a bit nicer. We can also come back here and start playing with gain, which will sharpen it up like that. And then, just to get to collect at the bottom, what we're going to use is the ambient occlusion pass. So I'm going to drop in another shuffle node. I'm going to shuffle out our underscore AO. If we take a look at it, this is what we're getting. And essentially what's happening here is ambient occlusion, the way it works is it's essentially ray trace information, but it's essentially distance away from each other. So if an object is touching an object, it's going to return a black value. And then the further away it gets, it's going to return a 1 value. So it's really just kind of like a contact shadow. And we can utilize this with our RGB setup. If we invert this, we now start to get a matte for this contact areas. And if I hit G for grade and then play with the gamma, we can really isolate it along those edges just like that. And then what we can do is if we come back to our noise, if I hit M to merge, and if I set that operation to multiply, just like that, we get these two combined. And if we jump back to our grade, you notice we're starting to get that color information just at the bottom, just at the contact areas like that. So to take this next level, what we can do is add more information down here. So it's nice that we're seeing a little bit of variation like this, but what we want is actually have like a nice layer overall and then maybe some more variation over top of that. So what I'm going to do is hit M to merge and this AO pass again, and instead of doing multiply, what we're going to do is do an additive operation, so plus, which will combine that. And then if I look at our grade, we're getting this. Just like that. And now it's collecting there at the bottom. And then we can come back here and start doing things like play with our grade and then play with the gamma, which will extrude it back up. Just like that. So if we want more or less, that's very easy to do. So you can utilize this point position noise pass for a lot of different things. This is just one technique to utilize it. You can use it to create very organic lighting like we did with the point position selection. But for now, what we're going to do is jump over to this next example, which is the atmosphere. So let's take a look on how to utilize this point position data to add atmosphere into our scene. So I'm going to drop in another shuffle node. And this time, instead of adding point position world, we're going to select point position camera. Just like that. And essentially what this is that we talked about before, it's XYZ data of our pixels, but instead of being in world space, it's within camera space. So if we select our blue channel, just like that, and we control left click and drag, we'll notice we're getting that depth information there. So -42 all the way back to -78, which is what our depth, which is how far our wall is away from the camera. So if we drop in grade mode by hitting G, I'm going to disable this, and I'm going to utilize this, my white and black points. And essentially what this is going to do is remap these values to values that are on screen. So if I select our white point, just like that, and I select our back wall, and then I select my black point, so select that color knob, control left click right there, and if we re-enable it, we're noticing we're getting this, which kind of looks and feels somewhat like an atmosphere. So I'm going to drop in another grade node and hook that up to our tree, just like that. And what I'm going to do is utilize this as a mat to control this grade node. So first off, what we want to do is make sure that we're affecting our RGBA channel. So currently we don't have anything in our alpha, but if we select our channels from RGB to RGBA, it'll move that information into our alpha channel as well. So if we take our mask of our new grade and pump that into our grade node over here, what we can do is start utilizing our black and white points to essentially desaturate our image like that and kind of lift the black values of our image like that. So you can see as it goes further away, we start to add in some atmosphere. And if we want to come back here and start playing around with this, what we can do is if we have the 4 and up to get these down to one single float value, what we can do is if we select in between this 4 and 2 here and middle wheel, scroll up and down, we can control where that starts. And we can do the same thing with our background image, just like that. So while looking here, I'm going to go back over to this grade node and kind of play around with this until we get something that we like. We could also use the point position world pass in a very similar way. If I drop in a point position world pass, what we can do is add atmosphere, but do it based on the height. So essentially this would be like a fog layer sitting against our ground plane. So if I select white, so if I select green into all the channels for that, and so if I select green for the Y channel into all those nodes, I can drop in another grade node and disable that, and then I can color pick my black and white point, which will remap our image. So select white point, maybe somewhere around here, control left click, and then our black point will be our floor. Actually, let's reverse that. So our black point will actually be our height information, so where we want the fog to end, and then our white point will actually be our floor, just like that. So it's kind of like a height map. And we'll want to select our channels RGBA again, and then I'm going to drop in another grade node, plug that into our main tree, and do the same technique that we were doing before. Plug that in, and then just play with our black point like that, which will give us a nice fog that's right along our base image right there. So say we wanted to get some volume rays coming in here. What I'm going to do is add in a noise pass, or noise gizmo rather, and drop in volume rays. And if we look at this, you can see where we're getting some nice looking volume rays going. So if I hit T for transform, and then merge this onto my scene, just like this. So the volume rays are A over B, which is our main tree. And then if I go back to my transform node, what we can do is move this around just like that. And we can add in this subtle, very, very subtle atmosphere over here. So if I drop on another grade node and just multiply that up, we can play around with the atmosphere just like that. So I'm just going to go back up this tree and play with this grade node. So I'm just going to make this a very, very subtle amount. Something like that. So we have a little bit of fog across the ground plane, but not much. Cool. So you can utilize this point position camera pass for a lot of different things. We'll be taking a look at it again when we get into things like 2D depth of field. But for now, what we're going to do is take a look at how to create point clouds with our point position pass. So I'm going to drop in a position to points node. And this is a node that essentially generates our 3D point cloud of our render. And if I plug this into our tree, go to surface point, we'll choose point position world, and our surface normal is going to be normal's world. And if I hit 1 over this and come over to our viewer and make sure that we're tabbing into our 3D scene, if I just hit F to frame, we'll notice we're getting a point cloud of our image. And if you want the Maya navigation controls, by default it's set up for Nuke. So if you go to Edit, Preferences, Viewers, and then 3D control type, by default it'll be set up for Nuke. If you just switch over to this Maya, you'll get your Maya navigation controls. So this can be really useful for a lot of different things, specifically relighting, which we're going to talk about, but it can also be utilized for things like map painting. Say you're integrating a map painting set extension into your 3D scene, and you bring in your camera. A lot of times it can be hard to know where to put those objects within your scene without having this visual representation of where things actually are living. So that leads us to our next lesson, which we'll take a look at relighting techniques. Specifically, one of them is with utilizing our point position pass to create a point cloud relighting system.